You don't have to look far for a headline that rocks us all.
A fourth teenage student died today after a school shooting in Michigan.
This school year, those headlines hit home.
Law enforcement says there was a shooting at Mount Tabor High School.
Police arrested a Southwest Guilford high school student last night accused of making social media threats toward 5 schools.
I went on social media and I saw everybody already posted it.
That was a wake-up call for us locally.
They found the gun in the parking lot here at Northeast High School.
There were 3 taken into custody: the suspended student, that student's brother, as well as their mother.
4 Guilford County school students charged after a gun was found at a high school. The Greensboro tobacco store robbed, the clerk fights back, and now one of the suspects, a 17-year-old Guilford County high school student, is dead.
It's time to talk about the problems. The conversation is critical.
Parents and teachers depend on it. Our children demand it.
It happens in the markets, it happens at a gas station, it happens in your neighborhoods, just random shootings you're hearing about.
Not every person in this community feels safe, and I think that we need to figure out how to fix that.
Let's find solutions. Let's make a pledge to protect.
Safety matters. Solving the problem starts with us, all of us.
And this is the group coming together to make a difference today. Violence is threatening the livelihoods of our families and our neighbors, and it is time we step up to stop it. I'm Chet Sober.
I'm Tracy McCain. For the next 25 minutes, we're going to have a very open and candid conversation about safety in our schools and in our communities. Why are these incidents happening and what can be done about it? We're joined here by Guilford County school leaders. I want to introduce Guilford County Superintendent Dr. Sharon Contreras. Next to her, we have Guilford County Schools Board of Education Chair representing District 8, Dina Hayes, and we have Guilford County Schools Executive Director of Emergency Management, Mike Ritchie, next to me.
Also joining us today are members of local law enforcement. High Point Police Chief Travis Stroud. Next to him is Guilford County Sheriff Danny Rogers and Greensboro Police Chief Brian James. Thank you all so much for joining us.
Yes. Well, before we get started, we want to establish some context here on the broader problem of violence in our country. And we have some numbers that we want to share with you. The FBI reports the number of homicides nationwide rose 29% between 2019 and 2020. For all violent crime, it went up 5%.
And that number is nearly double at the state level. The FBI reports violent crime in North Carolina rose 11% between 2019 and 2020. Homicides are up 23%.
And the violence has only continued into 2021. On November 30th, investigators say a 15-year-old opened fire at a high school in Michigan. 4 students died. Several others were injured, including a teacher. It is the deadliest school shooting since 2018.
North Carolina Public Schools saw 2 school shootings this year. One was at a high school in Wilmington. A student there was charged with attempted murder. The other was here in the Triad. A student died after a shooting at Mount Tabor High School in Winston-Salem. The 15-year-old suspect is charged with murder. So the big question we want to know is why and how does this happen? Dr. Contreras, let's start with you.
Thank you. You know, these are tragic events and lots of families and students are suffering, especially after being out of school for nearly 2 years and being home while their parents were working or parents were unemployed or homeless, and students were left to their own devices. In many cases, children, lots of children were suffering from mental health issues and traumatic events. And we know that 94% of school shooters suffered some sort of traumatic event in their lives. 91% of school shooters also suffer from mental health and behavioral issues, such as depression. And oftentimes these are untreated. Schools aren't equipped to handle all of this all the time. Schools don't have clinicians on staff. We have counselors, we have social workers, but schools don't have psychiatrists and other sorts of support that we need. And across the state, across the United States, in many cases, mental health supports have been decreased over time. And then you have this pandemic where children are alone for long periods of time. Adults are alone and suffering. You're locked up or you feel locked up. And you're in a situation where you feel that you don't have support or the sort of medical and mental health supports that you need. And things spin out of control very quickly.
And just to follow up with that, Chief Stroud, touch upon children turning to the internet during the pandemic as a source or an outlet and then finding other problems. Tell us about that part of the problem.
Well, we live in a social media world, and we see it in all capacities, especially in our schools, though, but it is in all walks of life. And it does affect the behavior that we see in the street. And I think what we see in the street from the law enforcement lens gets replicated in the schools. And it's important to note, though, as we don't get too far into this, that the problems that we see are not just isolated to the Guilford County schools. This is a nationwide thing that we have going on. And is an issue across the country. But the social media aspect has really played a role for us. We find things move much faster now in that social media environment. It seems to transform quickly and get out of control much more quickly. So it makes it hard for us to respond in the fashion that we need to keep it under control.
Sheriff Rogers, why do you think that the violence in schools is to where we are now?
Well, when I listen to Chief talk about the fact of the social media, social media plays a major piece of it, I believe. Things transfer so fast from one neighborhood to another, from one individual to another. People have seen things go across or things happen across the country, and they copycat. We have a lot of copycats, things that's going on throughout the state as well as even through our area. People see things that they think that they can get by with, and a lot of times it's the educational piece. They hadn't been educated where they would understand that, hey, what you're doing or what you think is cute or what you think is harmless will actually hurt someone where they don't actually think that it will. So I think a lot of times that it's just the fact that social media, the educational piece of it, breeds a lot of it. And unfortunately, we just have to, we've not seen the education piece that we need to see. We need a community to step up with us and social organizations to help us out as well. So it's a lot that I see that causes some things that make crime goes, but still yet I think it's still a lot of things that we can do with the community to try to help prevent some things. Some things we can prevent, some things we can't, and social media plays a major piece.
I would like to dig more into that law enforcement aspect. Some argue that we should have fewer SROs. Some say we should have more, not necessarily because they're a law enforcement officer, but because of their positive relationships with students and staff. We've learned those relationships with law enforcement need rebuilding at the community level. Sheriff, how do you think that plays a role in the SRO conversation in school safety?
Well, I'm very much aware that a lot of people they disagree with having SROs in the schools. Daily we get calls, okay? Trying to help people stay on the right track, trying to make sure that we continue to serve and protect everybody. So do I believe that SROs are needed through the schools? I do. I believe that they're needed through the fact that where we can educate, develop relationship with our youth in a manner that where they will understand that we're there to help, not actually there to arrest and seize, stuff like that. But when you look at bridging the gap in a community, I believe that in the youth, in the schools, law enforcement can play a major piece as long as law enforcement is trained how to interact with the youth, being able to understand the diversity that's going on within our communities as well. So it's a lot, but I agree with the SROs being in the schools. I think we have to continue to train, and which is what we do. Guilford County goes through a lot of training, and we make sure that I don't keep them in. I rotate the SROs throughout the school system, and I do that because I believe what it does is it continue to help build dialogue and communication and bridge the gap.
Well, let's shift to solutions quickly here. We know See Something, Say Something is working. We know this because it has prevented or at least caught suspects from causing harm. How do we stop it from happening, though? Chief James, would you answer that question?
I think when you talk about students, you have to think about the whole family. The school system only has them for a portion of the day. And then when they go back into their communities, they may be exposed to a number of things. So we have to look at, why are kids picking up guns in the first place? Oftentimes I get a question about, well, how can we stop the guns from coming in? That's a big question. The bigger question is, why do our kids want to pick up guns? So we have to think about, not only could there be something going on with that child, but there could be something going on with the parents or something in that household, and how do we get the resources to that household or to that community that can in effect have a positive outcome for the child. So it's really not as simple as something that the school system can do or the SRO can do. This has to be a community effort, and we have to be smart enough as law enforcement officers to realize that we can't do it all, and if we go to a home or we deal with a child, we may have to call the school system, or we may have to call social services or any number of services in the community, maybe nonprofits, but we have to figure out how do we have a positive impact not only on the child but the whole family, because that's essentially why they're doing what they're doing, not necessarily something that happened at school, but something that's rooted in the community and in that family.
Over the last few months, we have heard a lot of different possible solutions to keeping violence out of schools. Some people have suggested clear backpacks, others have suggested metal detectors. Mr. Ritchie, what are your thoughts on those ideas?
So I think that hardening is the easy part. It's the low-hanging fruit, and so people gravitate to that. But the reality is the most important part of any safety is the relationships made between a trusting adult and a child, and that ability for that child to approach the adult with the information. So going back to Tracy's point about see something, say something, that works because our children are building relationships. So that's where we focus. So we start the day off every day in the school system through an ID process, so that there is a staff member who greets every kid as they come into the school. And that is the beginning of a relationship. It's a beginning of a gauge every morning to see how that child is doing and where they are. And that is probably the number one way that we push safety, but it is a balance. So we haven't ignored hardening, but it's a balance between the relationships and then adding very, I would say, purposeful items, IDs, so that people can see people are in school. Things that will not affect the child in a negative way mentally. There's been a number of studies that have shown that metal detectors actually can make a child feel less safe rather than more safe, because the message being is, we have to have this metal detector in order to be safe in your school. Therefore, someone is coming. There's a boogeyman behind us with a gun. And that's that message that can happen. And so we avoid that. The other piece is that metal detectors really across the nation have not been proven effective. The majority of all school shootings actually occur outside. And that's a fact that some are not aware of. So we try to, again, build relationships so our children will talk to us daily.
Well, speaking of that, talking to parents and school officials, Dr. Contreras, you mentioned this earlier about mental health. What specifically does a greater focus on mental health look like day to day in our schools?
It means having enough support staff to support the students who come and say, I'm struggling. And actually, students do tell us this. They tell us they're struggling, and we try to match them with adequate supports, and schools don't have them available. And unfortunately, many communities don't have these supports available either. And this is an increasing problem for us after the pandemic, or going through this pandemic, where many more students are saying they are depressed. They are telling us they need additional support, and we don't have this. So we're looking for ways to train teachers who are already overwhelmed, but training educational professionals who are not clinicians to recognize signs that a student or a colleague may be in trouble, or to have a student come and say a family member might be in trouble. I know you're a trained social worker, so you may be able to add to this.
Well, a mental health clinician, and I think there are environments that produce mental health issues. And if we don't address the sort of systemic or structural issues, then we're going to see increased levels of coping skills and problem solving abilities over and over again. I mean, we've all been here, we've had conversations that this kind of a forum occurred 20 years ago because we were discussing the same problems and we were discussing some of the same concerns. And so I think it's because we've mostly focused on the issue at the individual level and not at the, when we talk about it starts at home, where homes are in communities that are not organic. They weren't naturally built, that they were built because of decisions that were made. And so in neighborhoods where you see increased law enforcement presence, there are the same communities that are the food deserts and the school deserts and the health deserts and the job deserts and the housing deserts and the environmental burdens and the transportation deserts. And so they're just bombarded with every issue that you can imagine. And until we step back and widen our lens and take all of those things into consideration, we'll just keep trying to fix individuals.
With regards to the mental health training that you spoke of, I mean, Dr. Contreras, you said it yourself that teachers already have this burden of so many things on their plate. What are their thoughts? I mean, is it realistic to think that you can provide this training to teachers and they'll be okay with learning these things because they already have so many roles?
I think that teachers do not want to become clinicians, but they do want to be able to recognize some of the indicators of trouble brewing. And they do want to attend those trainings. I think they don't want to be blamed, however, for not recognizing that a child may be the shooter, like sort of what we're seeing right now in the Michigan case, where suddenly we're pointing the finger at school counselors. I think, that's a problem, and it's going to lead to more educators leaving the profession because we're putting everything on the schools, like you should have known this. And they're teachers, they're counselors. Remember, counselors are not clinicians. And certainly we should be very aware. We should be looking for signs, but we need more help with actual trained professionals and in schools. And the state has given us more money for mental health professionals, but they aren't here. So we have the money, but districts are having trouble spending the funds now, not just here in Guilford County or in the state of North Carolina, but across the country because they're not in the universities anymore. They're not going through the preparation programs. So it's going to take time now to grow these programs again so that we have enough individuals in communities who can support the number of young people and families who need this type of support.
Yeah, and families, homes, they may not all know the rules when it comes to not bringing weapons to school. Chief Stroud, we were talking earlier about what you can bring and what you can't, and a BB gun is a weapon.
Yes, it is. I mean, that should be a pretty easy answer for all of us, that everyone should know. It should be no weapons on campus. Clearly, real weapons are off limits, but that includes our BB guns, our replica guns, our airsoft things. Any weapon has no business on our campus. It's an educational environment. That's what it is. And it's very tough because it puts everybody in a bad position. While this individual may know it's a BB gun or an airsoft gun, everyone else does not know that. So students have to figure this out. They see these weapons and that causes a panic. And once the panic is started, we're already on a downhill course. And that spawns us into another thing, threats at school. That's another thing. I mean, people look at those as, being an innocent prank, maybe to get out of class. Absolutely not. From the law enforcement side, we take every single one of those seriously. We're going to treat them seriously. We're going to approach them every single way because a lot of times when we do see bad events happen, school shooters, there were red flags. And maybe we didn't look at the flags enough. So we don't do that in law enforcement. So no weapons, and every threat we're going to treat as real. We have a couple of good examples of us, law enforcement, working with Guilford County Schools in the last 6 months to thwart a couple of social media threats is where it started. So we have some good things in our back pocket to work with. We've shown some good teamwork so far.
Yeah, and we know that parents are critical to any student's success, parents and guardians, I should say. Yes. How do families get involved, and what can families, parents, guardians do to make sure that they're successful in school?
There's so many competing factors. I think about, my parents raising 10 children, and I'm sure that was tough, but they didn't have the internet. And I said to Chief James, there were 3 television channels. And during the pandemic, I turned the television on. There were over 1,000 channels. And so parenting is difficult, but it's even more difficult now. So it takes a lot of partnering with the school and working, with other parents and coming together to talk about how, and your faith community, and whatever it is, to say, how do we make sure that young people are whole? What do we do? How do we provide more opportunities for young people to have relationships with one another? Recreation activities. I really enjoy and honor the sports activities we have in the community, the arts activities, but we have to do more of that. There used to be in community, the 3-on-3 basketball tournaments during the summer, and the Friday night and Saturday night locked-in recreational facilities. We have to do more of that because young people are having difficulty even forming relationships with one another. And I think if parents start thinking about how can we do these in our neighborhood and form these activities as parents, for our children, how can we work with the schools? We know we don't have all the funding we need, but we have one another. And we can work with our young folks and provide them with opportunities and activities to grow and thrive and learn how to interact together. I think that we can still have healthy young children who grow into healthy adolescents and healthy adults, but it's going to take the community coming together and spending time with children, spending time with teenagers, because we spend lots of time with children, and then when they become teenagers, we feel we don't have to spend that time anymore. And nothing is further from the truth. They need lots of time and attention.
Chief James, I'm curious to get your thoughts on this too. What role should parents or guardians play?
Well, as the primary caregivers, certainly that's a large responsibility, and parenting is very different now. And as Dr. Contreras said, there are so many things that kids are exposed to that we weren't exposed to growing up. And what I would say is that we all have to think about what is it differently that we can do that hasn't been done before. Obviously, the world is changing right before our eyes with the pandemic, with technology, and we have to think differently. We have to form partnerships that we've never had before, and we have to do things that, quite frankly, we've never done before. We are going to have to adjust to some degree, but we've got to figure out how to give our kids a chance, because we certainly, everybody on this panel that has a position, we won't be here forever, and these kids are going to take our place one day, hopefully. And so we have to give them an opportunity to get the education they need, to get the social interaction they need, so they can prepare themselves to take leadership positions in our community. So, certainly parents, as a parent myself, parenting is hard these days. It's very different, and we have to think about what we have to do differently that maybe wasn't done when we were growing up.
Chief Stroud, would you like to add something to that?
I agree with Chief James. Parenting is the hardest job I've ever had. It is. But there's so many influences, or things that influence behaviors, especially bad behavior, and it really doesn't take that much to get to bad behavior. What I think we have to do is take those influences, which is probably a lot more, and concentrate on the good behavior side. A couple things we have to know out of the gate. It's going to be time consuming. It's going to be a very, very committed effort. It's probably going to be costly. It's going to take time away from everything you want to do, and it's not going to be done overnight. But that's the effort we're going to have to push forward with to see a change in what we see out in the street. Because what we see out in the street is not working, clearly. So we've got to change something. But I do believe we see a lot of people in the community. There's a lot of good folks out there who are committed to this. Especially inside our schools and outside our schools. Once we can finally learn how to pool those resources and commit our effort, I really think that's where we're going to see a difference. But it's going to you have to realize it's going to be an inconvenience, but it's a good inconvenience.
Sheriff, I'd like to get your thoughts on that as well. We have just about 90 seconds left.
Well, we didn't get in this position overnight. You're probably looking at 30, 40 years or better of this actually coming together. So when we look at it now, I believe that we have to listen and observe the kids that's involved. They're the ones that's living the things that we see, the negative things that we see, as well as the positive. But what can we do to be a part of their life? I believe that we can listen to them, give them direction. I believe you give children room for error, but no room for craziness. So when we begin to look at those two, we have to make sure that we have organizations and groups, and those of us that's on this panel have take the time out to put things together, to listen to them and see what we can get done. So, I mean, we didn't get there overnight. We're not gonna get out of it overnight. But and we can't definitely arrest ourselves out of it. So it's one of these things that we're going to have to come together and dialogue throughout the community.
Some great insight from all of you. Thank you all so much for being here and being a part of this conversation. Obviously, this discussion can't stop after 25 minutes. We all have a voice and we all need to make a pledge to protect our community. You can watch this entire conversation in full on our website or our free WFMY News 2 app. Thank you for joining us.